the Center of Global Business at UT Dallas, for having us. And thank you to Hubert Zadorek and Leticia Ferreira for putting this together, along with all the wonderful staff. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be here with you all today and to be moderating this amazing panel of thought leaders here. I want to quickly introduce our thought leaders for our panel, Past, Present, and Future of Global Talent Mobility. Very excited to hear from you all. We have Kathryn Cassidy, President and COO at Altair Global. Hi, Kathryn.
Hi.
Good to see you. We have Horst Gallo, Vice President, HR Talent Management at IBM. Hello, Horst.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, we've got Mia Huddleston, Executive Director of the Global Mobility Center of Excellence at JPMorgan Chase. Hi, Mia.
Hello.
And we've got Peggy Smith, Human Capital Executive and Thought Leader. How are you doing, Peggy?
I'm awesome, Ben. Great to see you all and the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, and we also have a wonderful audience here. And audience, I want to remind you that there is going to be a Q&A at the end of this. It will be about a 45-minute session with a Q&A to follow. So as we're talking, don't tune out, tune in, get active in the comments. I want to hear your questions as well. We will ask those of our esteemed guests at the end of our session here. But I want to start off with a premise. I've always liked to say that global mobility is about bringing talent to jobs. Has that premise changed over the last year and a half? Horst, I'd like to ask that question of you. Has that premise changed, in your opinion, about bringing talent to jobs?
I'm not sure if it has changed. I think it has broadened, if I would say that, because I think we still have that premise that some jobs are specific to a location, and then of course you need to actually bring the best kind of talent into that equation. But I think the last year and a half or so has shown that this is not always anymore the case. I think there's a lot now of roles where you can actually bring the role to the person, actually where that person is sitting, with all of the virtual kind of work we'll be having. So I think it is much more broader now, and it gives us a great opportunity to have more impact.
Mia, in your experience as a practitioner, have you seen the way that your organization and you yourself have approached talent mobility change about the premise of bringing talent to jobs? As it changed, are we bringing jobs to talent more often now?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. I would say over the last 20 years in our organization, one of the biggest things that we've tried to do is create strategic hubs locations so that we do have clusters of employees in a variety of jobs, that when we do have either jobs or roles come up or people interested in sort of career change, et cetera, we do have sort of that available. So for that, we've definitely done that. What I would say the last year, though, it's been very interesting. Your organization has largely been in office, together. There's huge value in having water cooler talk, things like that within an office. What has changed for us is definitely this work remote environment. We have a large number of employees that have been literally working from home since last February. I haven't seen the inside of walls of my office since last February. And what that's proven is that we do have the capability to have work remote environment and still have major success and as a result of that. So it's definitely, I would say, evolving trend. We don't know officially where we'll land on a lot of that, but it's definitely an opportunity that I think our business leaders are warming up to, that sort of idea of work from anywhere.
Well, and one of the elephant in the room questions is, do employees need to be present to be effective? We've had about a year of data now under our belt. Mia, I'd like to kind of continue with you, and then I'd like to open it up to hear everyone's thoughts on this. But what have you seen so far on that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that we're getting actually more out of a lot of individuals, right? I think in some instances, depending on our market, we're more effective. You think about the tri-state area where sometimes somebody could have a 2-hour commute in the morning, right? They're literally waking up, getting ready, going to their home office. So we're getting more capacity out of individuals, provides a little bit more work-life balance for those particular individuals. We also have, it depends on your own circumstance, right? Some people like that. Some people actually have to be in the office, talking to people, sitting next to somebody. They're kinesthetic learners. They have to, have sort of that camaraderie sort of feeling. So I guess it depends on a little bit on the individual as well.
Peggy, I want to ask you the same question. What are you hearing around organizations' beliefs that people need to be present to be effective? Is that changing?
Yeah, Ben, it's a great question. I think what's happening and what I'm reading and talking to executives about is quite frankly, the chapter's not written. So I think executives are simply saying they are going to be as flexible as is necessary for the given moment as we traverse through various stages of the pandemic, various stages of the mental health elements of individuals and things along those lines. I think the other piece to this that I would add is there's, depending on what you read, New York Times did an article, others have done articles as well, which suggests that once the worker feels more capable, I think, or more settled with where they are personally from a vaccine and individual perspective, the research is suggesting that 25 to 40% of people are going to look for jobs. So that's a lot. Anybody here, just imagine, it doesn't matter the size of the organization, if 25% walk away, that's big. So what I think is not yet fully written is the chapter that HBR will come out with, or maybe even, Hubert and his team at University of Texas, Dallas will do this as well, which is to say, when we all left the workforce, when we all left the office and went into the home, we knew each other. We knew each other. We were all sort of, in the same crises. So if you now layer over this, 25 to 40% are going to leave. I'm not quite sure how you capture culture virtually. Like when I don't know you and I've never met you, excuse me, I don't know how you capture that virtually. How you have those employees feel connected when they've never really met each other. So short term, absolutely. I think it'll be remote. I'm not so sure in that long term. I just don't.
Peggy, you bring up phenomenal points. And Kathryn, I want to get your thoughts on this because you're a global mobility expert, but you're also presiding over a multinational corporation with employees all over the place. And Peggy's point about culture, I mean, you are the business also. So what does the business think about how to handle these cultural challenges in a work?
Thanks, Ben. I think Peggy is spot on. I mean, for us and a lot of the clients that we work with, culture is the number one discussion point, because I think while we all know each other now and we've been able to do a great job of maintaining our culture, and I would include our organization in that, we've all transferred to this virtual environment very well. We're staying connected. We have, an online in office presence that, everybody is posting on in a way that we didn't before the pandemic, and we're all in each other's lives so much more. So this is a really good feeling about maintaining the culture. But when we get back into growth mode, which we are, and we're hiring new people, how do you assimilate new team members into an organization? How do they get the culture? And I think most companies, Peggy's right, we'll all move to a hybrid. I absolutely think, of course, there are jobs that can be done remotely, but I think inevitably people will start to want to drift back into the office because of the social construct that's there, right? Because that's the other element here. Yes, there's the work environment, but there's also a social aspect to business. And I think that will bring people back in. And I also think collaboration is much easier face-to-face, and good collaboration sparks innovation. So I worry about being too remote, too distanced, and innovation, being suppressed as a result. That's certainly a concern of ours.
Great points, Kathryn. And I'm going to actually pivot to you, Horst, actually, as our talent management expert here. Horst, can you answer the question that Kathryn posed? How do we create the culture? And then what other thoughts do you have on this?
Yeah, and sorry for interrupting, because you can see that I'm very passionate about that. I think this is a topic which is great. I do think it's not only culture. I think there's also, Kathryn, you were talking about collaboration, innovation, I think is points there. And you're right, that this is very different when you know somebody than when actually everybody's new. And just because you see that now with the onboarding kind of process in the last 18 months, which was all virtual, and there's some challenges around. I do think tomorrow, at least when I look at that from ourselves, but also from the clients actually we work with from a consulting point of view, there's companies out there who cannot wait to go back to where they were before. And I find that actually a bit of a pity, and I'm not sure if that is the right kind of approach. But we have a lot of other companies out there who actually have used the last 18 months to really accelerate their transformation and their digitization over around that. And of course, it has shown that productivity actually is equally high or slightly less actually than what we have seen before. So they are really looking at different approaches. We have made a survey actually with our 350,000 people, and 80% of the people actually want to go back to the office, but they don't want to go back to the office in the same way. What they want to do is actually to maybe go back once or twice a week to do team meetings, to do collaboration, to do innovation, to do brainstorming, to have that cultural aspect, what both Peggy and Kathryn actually was describing. But at the same time, of course, they don't want to do that every day, because they have seen in the last year now that they can be much more productive by not having that pass to the office and everything else. So I think the new workplace is going to be a very hybrid one. I think a lot of companies today already, they're changing office space, be it Southwind, IBM. We are probably getting, or we're going to end up at 50% of the office space what we had pre-pandemic. But we need to actually change the environment, that it's really a collaboration space, not an office space where you go and actually do your work, but it's actually you do things in a very different way. And I'm really excited about that, because it gives us the best of both worlds, in my view.
You know, Ben, may I add on to that for just a second? And I think you hit on something, Horst, and we haven't named this, but it's this word flexibility.
Mhm.
And I think what we're really saying is that there's multiple ways I meant experience. There's multiple ways to define the experience that can be flexible. That's what I meant, the word experience. And so, you know, it can be a physical, geographical, or am I in Dallas or am I in Tampa? It can be what's going on within your office. It can be your workday, the 322, or even what Spain is experimenting with right now. And so I think that's the key here, is those organizations that can, you know, maximize the experimentation part of flexibility are going to be the ones that are net attractors.
Right.
So fascinating. So then what does that mean to us as global mobility professionals? How does that change the requirements of us in order to meet the needs of this workforce? Because the stakes are quite high. You know, Peggy cited that article, and Horst, I'd love to hear your take on this as well. But Peggy cited that article, what I think you said 25 to 40% of people are gonna be looking for new jobs. Now, how many are gonna be successful? We don't know. But I tend to feel that as well. I feel like it. But Horst, are you planning for that level of potential fluidity in your talent pool?
Are we planning? I'm not sure if we're planning that. I think we're trying to avoid some of that, because of course, if you have actually a 20 or 30% turnover, that's going to be very, very significant, especially in the current environment. But I think it is really important, like Peggy is saying, we're playing around with a lot of ideas around flexibility, proactive retention kind of measures, which link back, of course, to the way what we're describing today. But at the same time, of course, there's a business requirement. The business requirement, of course, is to drive innovation, to drive client interfaces, and clients are not all actually acting in the same way. But again, you talked about the role of mobility, and that's going to be a really interesting one, because the way how we have done things in the past might not necessarily be the same what we do in the future, right? There's going to be a lot of transformation we need to do. We talked about virtual assignments and the way how we move jobs from one place to the next. That's all going to be critical, and there's not going to be any silver bullet which works on that. But I do believe that there's going to be a lot of turnover, because people were sitting back, that jobs were not there. And I think especially in high tech, where you have still over the last 1.5 years, you didn't see actually unemployment. It's actually the other way around. We have a need for a lot of talent around that. Therefore, of course, global mobility still is going to be important. It's maybe different. In the old days, we have moved a lot of people actually to the West Coast because of all the tech companies what we have there. You see with many of the companies already out there, they are now offering work from home, either 5 days a week or 3 days a week, or they're actually opening up different headquarters in different places. We talked about Texas before, Kathryn is one of them, but it's also about moving the things then to places like Stockholm or Pittsburgh and some of the places. And that's, I think, going to be the interesting part with the flexibility, Peggy, I think what you described before.
Mia, I want to ask you the same question. I want to ask you two parts. One, what is your feeling on that 25 to 40%, we'll call it fluidity, because who's to say if they actually take another job or not, but they're looking, whatever. So I would like to know your thoughts on that. Do you feel like that number is directionally correct? And what is that? And then how does global mobility respond to that? Or what is the role of global mobility in the talent organization in responding to that?
Sure. So, from my perspective, I would say, speaking from the employee lens, flexibility is going to be wildly huge, like in the future. And I think as an employer, if you're not thinking about that, you will be remiss. You're going to have attrition, you're going to have talent retention issues, et cetera. So it will be imperative to sort of structure your programs around being flexible. At JPMorgan Chase, we've built out an agile sort of program. No longer do we have fixed things, one size fits all. There are a variety of different sort of business needs that pop up on a daily basis, and the complexities that we deal with globally in 52 different countries, having to deal with different regulations and immigration and compliance and regulatory environment because we're financial services, presents huge challenges for us. But where we feel that we're going to best serve that sort of employee client base is to be agile, be adaptable, have flexible programs to meet those business needs, whether it be a pandemic or the business cycle that we're in, whether we're struggling, finding talent, retaining talent, or we're in cost constraint mode. So I think that's going to be super imperative.
And Ben, can I just add,
Kathryn, please.
There's a lot of discussion about working from home and working remotely. We're seeing a lot of clients starting to formalize a policy around that and some guidelines. I think the bigger challenge for companies is the notion of working from anywhere, right? And so, are they going to insist that employees be attached to an office or to a headquarters or to a region, or is it really a free-for-all and they can work from anywhere? Because that is a whole different challenge. And again, the oversight, governance of that group, who owns it? If you suddenly have a work from anywhere policy, does mobility own it? I think probably we should, because we are experts in understanding what it means to cross a state border or to cross a country border, right? And to work in a different location and what that means. But again, I think a lot of companies are struggling with that notion, and employees, back to wanting flexibility, the notion of working from home, a lot of them are interpreting that as working from anywhere. I don't want to live in the Bay Area, it's too expensive. I want to go and live in Colorado, but I want to be attached to the head office in, Palo Alto. So I think that's a challenge for companies.
And as an emerging trend, the sort of program that's in our face today, because the pandemic is cross-border, right? And if you think about some of the complexities that come with that, employees do have the perception that they can work from anywhere. Some companies can do that. For our particular company, there's just regulations and things like that that just make it that more challenging. The answer is not always just no immediately, but there's definitely a new wave of an evaluation that's a little bit more stringent that you have to go through. As an example, anecdotally today, we have a person in Chile that wants to come to the United States just to get vaccinated and work here for a month. Well, you don't have a right to work here, so you can't. So I think there is the notion that employees have the perception they can work from absolutely anywhere, and despite the fact what our governments say otherwise. So.
Ben, may I add on as well, because it's really interesting, and I know, Mia, you're in the financial services sector. So one of the things that tangential to this conversation is we're finding here within the United States, lenders are now in their underwriting guidelines. If you're tethered so, far away from the office location, whatever, what's considered a boutique spot, right? They are now, through their underwriting guidelines, requiring the employer to say that they are going to support your working from that location. And I think there's some, I don't know if that's because they're skeptical about permanent remote, but what they're really trying to say is, I'm going to hedge my default bets here. I don't want to have a bunch of loans in default because this work anywhere is a fad and employers really, truly aren't in for it. So there's some kind of fun tangential things to look at as sort of headway markers.
I find that fascinating, right? Because and the thought process also is like, well, if you lose your job, if they find out you're working here and you're no longer employed and your income changes and now your income's tethered to the COLA of that area because you're in the hills of Asheville, North Carolina. Yeah, it could be a slippery slope for sure. Horst, I'd like your take though on the work from anywhere. So we kind of talked about work from home, and to Kathryn's point, people take work from home as, well, gosh, if I just need a laptop, I could do that in Bali. I mean, I could do that anywhere, right? I mean, that's the dream, right? But it's not the reality. Horst, what is the reality for a large multinational company like yours. How are you navigating work from anywhere?
Yeah, so it's a very, very important question. Of course, it gets back to the culture of a company, the flexibility of what you do. But we are very clear as an IT company here in the East Coast. We are not into working from anywhere. We're very clear that actually, when you look at the development of the last 10 years, 10 years ago or so, IBM had like more than 50% of the people actually working from home. And then actually we realized that is not helping our innovation, that is not helping the client focus, that is not helping collaboration. So we were trying to bring back people actually to the office in one spot so that they sit together and they drive innovation. Then of course, COVID now came, and with that also, of course, the acceleration of digital tools, because clearly 10 years ago, so Slack was not there, Trello was not there. Many of the tools what we are using today, they are really helping now, of course, actually with this collaborative kind of efforts around. They were not there. But now we're getting back and saying, what is it, what we want to do tomorrow? We want to have the best of both worlds very clearly, but it means that we want to have people close to the office, not, of course, that you actually go there every day, but close to the office, that you can go there every week, every 2 weeks for a certain period of time to do this collaborative efforts. And then, of course, you can work from, or you can live from the different places what it is. I've had a very fascinating conversation actually the other day with a consulting company, because there's people now talking about this work from anywhere. And there's a lot of people actually who've moved from the Bay Area to Denver, as an example. And the question actually they were asking is like, so what do you do with compensation? Are you going to adjust compensation downwards into those kind of places? I think so far I've not seen that companies actually go that path, because that actually has an impact again on the experience of people and maybe retention of people. But I think when you look at it from a business point of view, it is a very logical kind of question to ask, because the other way around, we are doing the same, right? So it's interesting, but we have a very clear view around that, and we have to work that through as we're actually getting more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've heard this trend called localization, right, where they localize pay. And you're right, Horst. It goes. Well, if you move someone to the Bay Area, they would expect the cost of living adjustment. Wouldn't it also hold true that there would be go the other way, because wages can't just go one way in an organization, right? Mia, I'd like your thoughts on that, on localization. Do you think that localization is a trend in compensation that might take hold if we allow people to work from anywhere?
Yeah, I think it's a consideration, certainly, if you think about it. If you think about some of the strategies that we've done as a firm, exiting sort of the New York market largely with our back office individuals, moving them to Plano, Texas, which is a more of a low cost sort of location, building strategic hub sites that are in a more cost effective location. I definitely think it's a trend that most employers should be, if they're not already considering, especially larger employers that have clusters of employees, tens of thousands of employees that they can put in one location. But it is definitely something that has to, from a business finance perspective, has to be taken into consideration. If you have a job and the seat's in Denver and the cost of it's double in San Francisco or wherever, like that doesn't make good business sense to keep the pay at where it should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because for so long corporations have created offices in lower cost areas to take advantage of those cost savings, and now it's interesting that employees are capitalizing on a bit of that arbitrage now. I want to ask you about employees and the dynamic with employers, but first, you had mentioned something earlier I wanted to go back to. You said that there was an evaluation kind of matrix or an evaluation steps that you would go through when determining if someone was allowed to work from anywhere. And I wanted to just, if you wouldn't mind, if you could be a little more specific about that, I think it'd be very interesting.
Yeah,
How does the business look at that?
Yeah, sure. Think about sort of a trader who's licensed in the UK and they want to go to, I don't know, Bali to work, right? They don't have licensure in Bali. We probably don't have a headquarters there or some sort of entity that we could peg compensation to, et cetera. So those are some of the criteria that we initially look at. Compliance, right? Like, can they perform their role? If you're an accounting person or a technology person and you're a developer who's not pegged to any type of sort of sales environment or licensure, you might quite frankly be able to work from wherever, as long as we have a paying entity that we could leverage in that particular country. But some of the compliance aspects of it and the regulatory aspects around licensing and things like that really prohibit that individual from just working from anywhere. The other piece that's really, really critical is right to work, right? Like we've got a ton of requests. Thousands of people are coming through to us and through our channels saying, hey, we want to work elsewhere. So do you have right to work elsewhere? And that's a big, big thing. And if you think about some of the challenges that we've had in the immigration landscape lately, the proclamation in the US, we're not able to get people into the country, very, very limited sort of visa temporary right to works are being approved, et cetera. So that's a huge, huge challenge. So I would say those are the two big things that we're looking at. And then the other factor would be, you know, what is the job? Does it require you to be sort of in a cluster of employees so that you can have innovation and things like that? Or is it completely fine, managers completely okay, the person's senior enough, et cetera, to work, you know, from anywhere, you know, those sorts of things. So that's kind of the mindset at the moment, but largely the initial sort of review is going to be compliance based.
These questions seem new. These questions and these conversations seem very, very new. 20 years ago, it doesn't feel to me like these conversations were being had with nearly the same frequency. Peggy, has the dynamic and relationship between employer and employee changed fundamentally? Do employees have more leverage than they've had before to have these kinds of conversations?
I think they certainly do. And Ben, I will answer that, but I want to hop on one thing, if I may, going back to Mia's point,
Please.
if that's okay.
Please.
You know, as Mia talked about this framework and this questions and those kinds of things, I would encourage anybody, and if you're a job seeker, which a lot of the graduates on this call are, and you're finding an employer that's doing this, make sure you have a real fundamental understanding of how they are going through that, Mia, to your point, and that it's documented, because otherwise it could have an unintended consequence of smacking of DEI, you know. And so what do I mean by that? And just statistically, it's proven that men are better negotiators than women. So if you don't have a, you know, framework that is sort of objective enough to when you're going to decline somebody for a work from anywhere request, just be careful, you know, around that. So, you know, there's all kinds of tentacles that play in social constructs. So anyway, Ben, and maybe that's
Great point.
To your point here, which is that I firmly believe that we are going to move overnight, if we're not already there, from a job shortage to a talent shortage environment. And I absolutely believe that this is a period of time where the worker has, you know, bargaining chips here. And I'm going to loosely define worker, because I think worker can be somebody that gets hired on full time. It can be a fractional worker. It can be a gig, you know, a gig worker, whatever, however that gets defined. And the other stat that continues to trend is the fact that more and more people that are coming, this graduating class that's going to come into the workforce, really want a different work experience than I did. And when I joined the workforce, and there was another great article from the Times called the YOLO experience, you only live once. And the kids that are graduating, the youth right now, simply are saying, man, I watched this pandemic take out friends and this and the, you know, and all these things, and saying, I don't want a work experience like that. I want to be able to turn on and off my skills for an experience that matches what I want, rather than I want to have a house with, you know, 4,000 square feet and blah, blah, blah. So I firmly believe that that is here to stay, because there is a global talent shortage, period, end of story. We don't have to get into population replacement rates, but it's how well employers can react to that. So hands down, it's a skills-based economy, and the people with the most in-demand skills will win the day.
Mhm.
Horst, do you feel that? Oh,
Oh.
Horst, and then Kathryn, if you don't mind,
Sorry.
because I do have another question for you, Kathryn, as well. Horst,
So-
are you feeling that?
Yes and no, and then let me maybe add an additional dimension to that, because I think Peggy, you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of things actually happening around that. But when we talk about marketplace, it is a global marketplace, right? Because I think what we have seen in the last 1.5 years is that it doesn't matter if you're actually down the road or if you are in China or India. And I think this is a significant kind of thing around that, what has as well a big impact on global mobility, because in the professional services environment, IT, actually many of the things, work has been still being done by maybe low-cost kind of resources, and you bring them to a place because that's needed. And then actually you do client kind of projects and so forth around that. The last 1.5 years has shown that this is not necessary. Why do you bring them over? Because actually you can do them from the places they are, and maybe you need to mix and match and actually have a hybrid model where you can actually do travel to do with the off work. So this global marketplace or this global skill economy is there, but it is a global. It is not on a country basis, especially in areas where the physical presence, like in financial markets or so, is not there. Financial markets is a very different, or financial services is a very different one, because you have people actually in front of it. But if it is a developer kind of part, it doesn't matter where this work is going to be performed. And I do see, when you talk about gig work, Peggy, again, that's a global kind of concept, because there's so many things, and I'm not sure about you, but LinkedIn, I think in the last year or so, I've gotten hundreds of messages and saying, hey, I offer the services. I'm in Bangladesh, or I'm in somewhere in Africa, or I'm doing this, and a fraction of the cost. And of course, because the collaboration environment is there, this is where the gig workers actually can come in. So it's adding an additional dimension, which I think was not necessarily there a few years ago.
Right.
Great point, Kathryn.
Yeah, I just to build on both of those points, one of the things I wanted to say was, just because everybody has been working from home doesn't mean everybody's been good at it. And also, managers have not necessarily been managing well in that environment. A lot have, but some have not. And I think back to this notion of, if we're going to this hybrid model, we need to equip both team members, but also managers, on how to manage a diverse workforce in this way, when it's part in an office, part still remote, and on a global level. So pre-pandemic, there's a whole business around building cultural competency around global team building, and a remote global team or a virtual team, right? All of that still needs to be built up, because we have a lot of people now who are used to managing a team right in front of them, probably a domestic, right, in any country, and now potentially that team is very diverse and partly remote. So I think there's a lot of work that companies still need to do to equip people to better manage in this new sort of hybrid environment.
Excellent point, Kathryn. And Horst, we kind of alluded to it a bit when you talked about the different, Slack and all the different, Discord and all the different tools that are being used as well. I mean, managers may have the principles, but they may not have the tools and the skills to actually manage remotely. Horst, do you see, is there an emphasis on the upskilling of leaders to manage global workforces remotely and virtual assignments and all that stuff?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think hands down, I think any one of the companies, I think, had to do a lot of change. Not only, of course, the collaboration tools, but you had to actually implement around that, because you needed it from one day to the next. But it's really about how a manager actually is acting, more check-ins, being more authentic, having this personal conversations as well. Because of course, like Kathryn was saying before this, or I think it was Mia, the water cooler kind of effects are not happening anymore, where you actually take somebody for a coffee and actually have that conversation. So you need to schedule it, because everybody after a call, everybody's on a conference call in your living room every day. But when the conference call is finishing, nobody's there anymore. So you don't have these moments where you walk out of a meeting or into a meeting and actually doing this. So yes, it actually requires a very different way of leading and managing around that, both from an employee, but also from a manager point of view. And we have done a lot of efforts around that. And I felt like, at least there is, when you actually do a lot of the efforts around that, there can be a very, very positive effect. And I can't remember who was saying it. It was maybe Peggy or Kathryn. Productivity is very, very high around that. Actually, we have seen a huge spike in the engagement of our employees, 6 or 7 points actually throughout the year, because our managers have made a specific effort to actually check in, to have this conversation. And not only the managers, but also then the executives. Our CEO is hosting kind of conversations where he's talking with his dog by the side, and the kids are coming in. It's much more personal around that. So all of these things together help us that, but you're absolutely right. The enablement of managers and people actually is absolutely fundamental.
I want to shift.
Sorry, just
Oh,
one
go ahead. No,
comment real
Amia, go ahead,
quickly.
please.
Yeah, so that's really important. And one of the things that we've realized and recognized is productivity is up, which means we're not working less, right? So we've had to teach leaders and managers empathy for the employee that's in that circumstance or situation. And because you don't have that opportunity to sit next to someone always and kind of see what's happening, it's really important that managers are doing those check-ins. They're really hearing how their employees are feeling, what they're going through, what their work-life balance is, and really making adjustments so that they can accommodate that. So it's a very different working environment than in the office.
I love the comment about empathy. We hear so much about it. The skills that we're talking about now, not saying empathy wasn't around, but it just seems like there's a different emphasis on different skills than there were 18 months ago, let's say. I want to shift and talk, kind of go from these micro skills on a personal level to go into kind of a macro skills and capabilities question here. So we've established that work from home is a real thing. We've established that if flexibility is not there in the workforce, that people are going to start looking whether or not they go or not. We don't know, remains to be seen. The chapter's not yet written. I love that. And it sounds like work from anywhere is going to be a bit of and employees have more leverage now than ever. So the work from anywhere is going to happen to some degree. And it's going to be up to the business, to Mia's point, to kind of decide when and where that happens. But Kathryn, I want to ask you, with that information, what does the global mobility industry, right, all the supply chain, the service providers of, the ground that rises up to meet these employees on their transition, right? What are we doing or need to do in order to support these things?
Well, I think, 6 months into last year, a lot of people were saying, does the pandemic, has this killed off mobility? Are people not going to have to move in the future because we're all going to be working from home? I don't think that's the case. I'm just going to put that out there. Back to this, hybrid will mean part in office, part working from home potentially, but you'll need to be in an office. And so I think the fundamental reasons to make a move are all still there. We're still a global economy. We will be opening up in new markets and having to send over expertise. We will want that transfer of culture from one office to another. So that will require folks to move. And then, of course, there's still the requirement for all global companies to develop global talent with global mindset. And to do that, you need to move around. So I think there will still be that requirement for mobility, no doubt. But does the mobility industry see itself supporting the kind of work from anywhere, work remote population? I think was part of your question. I think we do, as part of our value proposition to our corporate clients, how can we help in that space? But I think what is still being built out, the book has still been written, is that how much support are companies going to give employees who make that move voluntarily? Are they going to, there's a duty of care to some degree. Are they going to keep that? There's definitely compliance, to Mia's point. So how much support are companies going to provide? And maybe that's just in directing them to expertise, right? We have a consumer channel. Our company's going to say, hey, we work with a relocation company. If you're wanting to make a move because you need 4,000 square foot because you need an office because you're going to be working from home, maybe you can use their supply chain. We're not paying for anything, but there's a vetted, tried and tested supply chain over there. Most relocation management companies have this kind of channel. And so I think we're making that channel more robust with a lot more local supply chain and also a more robust technology platform. And I think most companies in our space are definitely looking at that, because I think that's where we see ourselves being able to help our clients with that kind of mobile population that's mobile but is not a relocation.
And I think fundamentally the business drivers of a move still exist. That never goes away, right? That value proposition and the cost of a move depends on whether it's a voluntary, I need to go here because I want to personally develop myself in a global experience, versus I need you to go to this location and transfer this knowledge for the next 3 years and build up this team or whatever the situation is. Or you have an executive who needs global exposure because they're part of the succession plan. I think those business drivers still absolutely exist. And so the cost of those things depend on what that business need is.
Hey, Ben, may I add on to this for a second? I always feel like I'm the one butting in, like the caboose. But I think there's some really good points in what both Kathryn and me are saying, and I want to add to it, which is simply that aside from moving you there for a job, if we study, and again, come back to this graduating class that's going to come out and we know they want an experience, I think organizations that create a performance reward model whose reward is an experience rather than cash or stock, because face it, we know they're not going to stay around. It's just this, they want that experience. That's another way that mobility, I think, can reinvent itself and say, you know what, because one, we're going to make sure that you're compliant and this, that, and the other, but you're our star sales, whatever it is, our star developer. And so we're going to give you the option of a cash bonus, some stock, or, kind of like, let's make a deal, door 3, 6 weeks in Dubai, and do that, because I think that's getting at the flexibility of compensation that I might want rather than assuming the company knows what I want. So there's another aspect of mobility that we can be so creative about right now. Anyway, I just wanted to add that because I think it's more than how we used to think about it.
I think that's a great topic, and I want to stay there. And before I ask Horst to expound on this using mobility strategically, I want to also ask all the people that are watching us right now, all the audience out there in audience land, get in the Q&A. The comments are open. You can leave a comment, but you can also leave a question in the Q&A. We are going to start taking your questions, so please, I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions in the Q&A. So leave that. Horst, what is the opportunity to use global mobility strategically, to Peggy's point? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, a lot. Actually, Peggy, I like the idea of actually looking at it from a very different angular point of view, because it gets back to actually where I think global mobility is actually developing to. And I think that the last year actually has opened up a lot of opportunities, because historically, I would argue that mobility or the mobility function in a company has been a bit of a little black box, a delivery kind of organization of something. And now we need to get more towards being integrated into talent management. And talent management actually means that you actually have to have an impact on the decisions actually upfront, that you're an advisor, that you're a consultant, that you actually bring something to the table. And then, of course, actually influence other areas. The point about being a retention kind of tool is a very interesting one, because when you look at the generations which are coming after us, who are on the phone, but also a bit older than that, for them, international experience, moving around, changing things actually is much more fundamental than it actually was in the past, and it's much more normal. Because, of course, also they actually travel, and they don't need a travel agency. They go on Airbnb, book their trip, and the experience is actually all in one. And that's what they expect, of course, as well from the mobility industry. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to change the way how we look at that. I like, Kathryn, what you're saying is I think it's not only more the corporations, but it's that private kind of part around it. I would think that at one point we will have a platform much broader than it is today, where actually people can go and buy in services actually as they please in a plug and play, and somebody has that experience actually in the middle, and it's much easier around that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I do believe that mobility needs to think about how they can add value. And they can add value, of course, actually by understanding the business in a much better way, how we make money, what are the challenges, what are the problems what we are facing. And then, of course, actually coming to the table with information, with value, meaning data, because we have a ton of data and we're not using it. And the data could actually be to say, look, you have this project that we're going to start there. Look, historically it has shown actually that people from that kind of area mixed with something else would really make a good team. They can drive the culture, and that's the kind of area what you can see. This is the people what we have in the company to do that. That's a suggestion. You can really add business in this. And then, of course, you can actually even say, when you get back to mobility and saying, this is the immigration challenges around. And by the way, if you do it 1 month less, and you have a tax impact and a benefit around that. So there's lots of stuff we could do if we get to this strategic level. We use data and analytics for that, and be proactive and predictive going forward.
That's fascinating. Mia, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the opportunity for mobility to be more strategic, either from a talent development, retention, or in other ways in the organization?
Yeah, I think we're a piece of talent management, talent development, right? And we have to figure out how we're putting ourselves at the seat of the table so that we can articulate those strategies that make sense, right? Data is going to be huge with that. Wrap your arms around your data, understand your population, understand your trends, understand your ROI if you can actually tie it back. But bringing forth strategies that are both value add to the business, whether it be if we do this for 4 months or 6 months, it's going to save us X amount of dollars, and really bringing that value. And it also then develops this individual, et cetera. That's critically important. But that's been a gap. And I think we've all been trying to work towards that for many, many, many years. I think we're there. We just now have to really execute to keep ourselves at the table.
Kathryn, what have you seen as far as companies utilizing mobility in creative and strategic ways?
Well, that's a loaded question. Do we have another half an hour? I think to me, as point, companies that are doing this really well involve mobility up front, as part of the discussion around workforce deployment and management and talent management. And, we saw a move towards streamlining global single policies, and now we're seeing a kind of it's kind of going back to much more nuanced policies, much more flexibility, much more choice, employee choice, the core flex notion. We're seeing that being deployed a lot more. And I think, and Horst brought up generational differences. With the 4 generations roughly in the workforce, we see very different applications in some ways, and part of it is where folks are in their career, but also in terms of their attitude to moving. And so we're seeing companies being smart around that, and then also being smart around, just making sure that they're focused on the experience of the individual. Peggy mentioned the experience word. It is foremost, and I think this past year has really kind of highlighted how employees feel about their work experience and their moving experience, and it needs to be highly customizable, or feel that it's highly customized. And so I think the old days of being very rigid are definitely gone. Compliance, of course, that's at a minimum, but beyond compliance, we're seeing a lot of flexibility and nuance in policy application. At the same time, there's still always going to be that eye to cost. Right. And I think going forward, that is going to be the huge challenge, right? As we continue to try and be flexible and meet the demands of Gen X, Gen Z, all these young folks coming in.
What comes after Z? Do we even know?
I've heard Generation Alpha. Is that what I'm hearing?
Anyway. Or AA or something. I think.
AA, right. Yeah, exactly. I still say Generation Z, by the way, so just saying. But yeah, I think, again, over the last 20 years, we've seen mobility go from being a very logistics-based, tactical part of the organization to absolutely being part of the talent management team. I think that's awesome, and I think that will continue. And like I said earlier, I still think mobility needs to step up and say, we want to own that remote workforce, because we want to make sure that the company's doing the right thing, and we're building the guidelines, and we're making sure that we're compliant.
And just
seems like go ahead, Mia, please.
The one thing that we also have to sort of think about when we want to make for sure we're linking to talent is client segmentation. It's not only having agile programs and core flex and all these things and suite of services. It's like, how are we sort of addressing our client segmentation, and how are we driving certain things for that population so that we have success, whether it be retention, employee experience is huge, etc. There's a difference between sort of a digital delivery and then your C-suite, in delivering these types of services. So client segmentation is really critical.
Absolutely. That intersectionality between human help and tech help, I think as an industry, and being able to flex that, to Mia's point, is going to be critical going forward. One size does not fit all anymore. It never really did, but we all tried to make it work that way.
I feel like we could talk about this for a long time, right? This is at the root of what we do every day. This is great. The conversation has been tremendous. I wish we could talk about it a little more. We do have some questions from the audience, and I want to make time and space for these questions as well, because they've been patient with us. So let's see, we've got some really great ones here. I am going to, well, you know what? We're going to start kind of in order here we have an interns new hires question. And I'm going to direct this to Mia first. How are your companies planning to manage interns/new hires this year?
Probably
Kids want
similar to
jobs,
what we did
okay,
last
Mia?
year. Yeah, oh, I know. We kept our class last summer. They were all virtual. They got, shortened sort of experience, but didn't change the, value or compensation that we intended on paying them. So we do value those. And I think in the US, we had over 5,000 interns every single year. And then globally, of course, that's, probably equal in all the different countries. So they're critically important to the success of the future of our organization. And we will always have an investment for interns at JPMorgan Chase, especially graduate analyst programs, those who sort of have interned with us and then become employees and do 2-year rotational programs afterwards. So we have a long relationship with our intern population.
Awesome. Horst, what's the plan for interns and new
Yeah.
hires?
Same kind of story for us. Last year was a good start. We learned a lot, and we're going to do the same thing actually this year because it's just uncertain whenever we want to go back. So we have the same numbers. What we put in place, of course, is a lot more hand-holding, personal check-ins, but also more the how do I call that? Like the evening kind of sessions where everybody is just meet and greet, because we have to do that virtually. So these are additional things what we are putting in place really to drive some of the cultural aspect around that. But it's going to be the same thing because it is important, and that virtual collaboration is going to stay in our field. So people actually need to learn about that, and they need to be productive from that.
That's great. We've got another question here from Kerwin Guillermo. Hi, Kerwin. Kerwin, he's got some good questions here. Have you seen an emergence of a job/role decomposition? So jobs can be better redesigned to adapt to the needs of both the business and preferences for the talent pool.
I think it's a great question. I can start, Ben, if you want, because we definitely see that. I think in the last years, of course, we talked about this first of this tours of duty, like the LinkedIn founder actually was talking about. But now this actually goes more down to a gig economy within a company, where you actually try to take jobs and projects actually out. You have a marketplace actually where people can apply for that and actually do that, because that actually is part of the skill development of a company, or the upskilling, because you do a lot of training. I think every one of the companies actually do that now. And you get the theoretical kind of plans, but you don't know how to implement it and how do you actually use it over and that. So we have done a lot of these, this making that job smaller, putting it out there as projects so that people actually can collaborate around that. And it's a great way, of course, to upskill and reskill people overall.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Peggy, what are your thoughts when you hear decomposition of jobs?
Scary. It's a scary word. I think we got to replace it because it suggests it's a death of something. But that aside, I would say, Horst, kudos to you and your organization for doing what you just said, because you're, if not the first, one of the very first I've heard suggest what you were talking about. So I absolutely think Kerwin is right that there needs to be a transition of this. But I think right now, HR today, at least in the United States, is still largely consumed with what is a return to work, when is a return to work, and how are they going to address environmental, social, and government stuff, governance things. And this is, again, for our US group, which I think most of the students here, obviously they're attending Texas, Dallas, but there's a lot of energy still placed at the HR feet today around Black Lives Matter, Me Too, climate change. So once we can settle, we're still in a PTSD environment from the pandemic. We're not through it. And I think once they can get through that, they can really see our 25 to 30 to 40% really, really leaving. Then you'll be able to see some investment in 2022 about the reimagining of HR in the way that Horst described it and what Kerwin talked about. So again, coming back to, how can you capture that skill set internally? Can you create what they're looking for externally? I mean, last little quick fun story. Moons ago, when I worked at Microsoft, on any given day, we had 5,000 open positions. And we were terrible at re-recruiting internally. So, you know, we had this protectionism of, oh, well, Peggy's really good in this department, I'm not going to let her go apply to that job. Instead, Peggy left and went to Google. And so we have to figure out ways to recruit and our own talent and help sort of bring that forward. I think we got a lot of work to do there, but Horst, I'm going to ping you offline because I love what you guys are doing. And I'd like to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Does anybody else have a thought on that before we go to the next question?
Yeah, so, you know, I think we were super focused on that trajectory, Peggy, pre-COVID, but you're absolutely correct. COVID and diversity are definitely our priorities right now. Return to office is critical for us. That's a priority. Once we can get through some of those things, I think we can get back to some of our long-term strategic goals. And some of that's, you know, fungible skills, right? Like I might not always sit in global mobility, but I need to have the skill set to go over to payroll or to go over to recruiting or to go over to wherever and leverage sort of that leadership skills that I have. So that's some competencies that we're pre-COVID, we're really strongly working on, and we'll get back to that once our clients are taken care of, for lack of a better term.
This is great. These are great questions. Thank you, Kathryn, for that one. We've got one here from Mike Peng. Are companies still planning to continue global management trainee programs as a way to provide global rotational experience and develop global leaders? Mia and then Horst.
Absolutely, 100%. That's the backdrop of our intern programs, our analyst programs. Our intern programs are our feeders to that. We will always have those rotational programs in place. And then depending on businesses, what that looks like. If you think about JPMorgan Chase, it's a pretty diverse line of business driven organization. So huge presence in the US, but a huge presence globally as well. So there's definitely opportunities for that.
Horst, I'm going to change the question slightly. Okay, we're going to add a degree of difficulty. How have global management trainee programs changed in a way of developing global leaders? How will they change going forward?
How will they change? Yeah. So because I think how have they changed in during the pandemic? That's very clear, right?
Yeah.
At home. But how will they change? That's a very good question. We're actually having a lot of thoughts around at the moment. What needs to change? How they need to change? Because we feel like the old way of actually rotating people a year here and there might not necessarily be the right kind of thing anymore. Do we need to do it more short term, having 3 months here, then having them work in remote kind of environments around that? So we're not 100% sure how it is. Clearly, like Mia is as well. For us, global mindset and experience is absolutely fundamental because, of course, we're in like 174 countries. It's just the name of the beast. For us, probably like 80% of our senior leaders have been on an international assignment one way or another. And therefore, of course, this is absolutely key. So we have an emphasis around that. How it's going to change, I'm not 100% sure yet. I think that's still somewhere in the stars for us.
Well, Kathryn, you work with hundreds of companies. What have you seen with a change in rotational programs?
Mainly with regards to the length of time that people are spending in location. To Horst's point, it used to be very much a year. People are reducing that a lot, and then I'm also we're seeing the opportunities being opened up to much a broader group. So traditionally, it was a lot of headquartered people, hard at headquartered, moves around the world and back to headquarters. We're starting to see interregional rotation programs happening a lot more. And this isn't very recent. This has been over the last 5 or 6 years. But those opportunities being given in truly global companies across the board. So yes, duration and the I suppose the home host combinations are definitely much more diverse.
Yeah, this is great. We're running up against it here a little bit, but I see some great questions, so I'm just going to go. Kerwin says, we have seen traces of protectionism prior to the pandemic and increased focus on local workers in response to rising unemployment or even underemployment rates. May I seek your sense of where geopolitical trends are leaning towards? Who wants to tackle that one?
I can go, but I don't have a lot of big insights around that. I read this morning that Singapore actually is trying to restrict immigration for certain professions or so. So I think that will continue, especially now that we have big unemployment rates in many of the countries around, that everybody wants to get back on track. So I think for the short-term future, I don't see that change. Even here in the US, I don't see the current administration actually making a lot of changes around that. But maybe a few years down the line, I hope that we're going to go back more to where we were actually before, where global marketplace is really global. But that's my view, and it's not very informed.
Then, as long as we're playing crystal ball and, you know, and the not very informed card, which I'll take, you know, my perspective is slightly different from Horst. I think we're going to get there sooner, because what you saw and what I recall when protectionism first sort of got its muscles, you know, a couple years back, you equally saw other countries that were struggling with talent accessibility say, we're going to make it easier. Countries like Estonia did some great things with their e-residency program. Even France came out after Macron came out and said, you know what, we're going to make it easier and do an 18-month, I think it was 18-month visa for the high-tech industry to attract it there. Canada had its 1 million workers by 2020 initiative. So what you saw were countries that were previously marginalized or hard for them to get access to talent say, boy, as the more mature parts of the world want to clamp down, we're going to take advantage and go the opposite direction. So my firm belief is we're going to see that, you know, one country's loss is another country's gain. And they're going to say, well, it doesn't really matter what you look at. There is a global skills shortage, period, and a story. And so they're going to say, how can I make that easiest? And what do I need to do so that I can get that talent into my country? So I think we'll get there.
And I
Great
think it
points.
depends on the role too, right? Like if it's a business critical role, that's going to impact the economy if it's not sustained, or, you're right, I think governments are going to have a little bit of a different view on some of the roles that are within organizations that need to be filled with global talent.
I really love this question here. So what becomes the impact? I mean, let's extrapolate this crystal ball activity for a second. What becomes the impact 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if we believe in the premise that access to talent is the lifeblood of economies, right? We talk about replacement rate, Peggy. You bring that point up all the time. And if we see some countries closing, some countries opening, saying bring it on, what happens 5-10 years from now globally? And to Kerwin's point about the geopolitical trends.
I think you see countries, as Peggy highlighted, like Estonia, countries, I mean, 10 years ago, we saw everybody rush into Czechoslovakia, right? Everybody was going to Prague because it was a highly educated, multilingual location, where low-cost location. And so I think you'll start to see some countries, as yet unknown potentially, kind of emerge as being the next place where you want to put your shared services, or you might want to put a headquarter for that region, because they are making it easy to get in. But it does depend, back to the point, you've got to have that workforce available locally, because again, there will be some jobs that will transfer in there, but you want to be able to hire locally as well. And I think, China is going to get very smart on this, right? And so, it started and it's ending, our office in China is fully open, and life there is somewhat back to normal. I say somewhat. I think we've got to look out for China and other countries, trying to kind of take the place of being that superpower in terms of economy. I mean, they're already there, but in terms of people wanting to move there and work there. So I think it could look very different, to your point. The protectionism was very worrying. A lot of it was politically motivated, right? Let's hope that the rhetoric dies down and we actually start getting back to a more mobile workforce.
Well, it was interesting because we were seeing these trends in multiple countries. It wasn't just the US or the UK, or nationalism and protectionism were really kind of coalescing in a lot of areas. I have another interesting question here. This will be our last questions from Diana Corona. Diana says, how has the role of technology changed for you in the new global reality? what significant gaps do you see between the promise and reality of technology? And how would you like to have those gaps addressed? The promise and the reality, the chasm. I'd love to hear this from our practitioners. And actually, we're going to do it around the horn because technology really, underpins everything that we do, right? So Mia, would you like to lead us with this?
Sure. It's huge, right? I think that having agile technology at our fingertips is critically important for us to be able to address the evolving business needs that we're all facing, whether it be industry or corporate practitioner. I do think that though we need to be less working in silos as an industry, and I mean industry across mobility, not just relocating of the individual, immigration, tax, so all the other pieces that sort of make up a mobility assignment, etc. We do need to get better about integrating. And I think that if we can integrate and become more seamless around that, the employee experience improves. Because to the employee, they don't care that they're working with this particular company on this piece of it. They also have to take a business trip over here. And so there's going to need to be a business visa and travel and all those sorts of things. So we just have to come together as a collective industry and integrate in a bit better of a way versus the silos. And I think that will help the employee experience.
Great, wonderful, Mia. Horst?
Yeah, so of course what Mia said is absolutely correct. There's a lot of things there. I do think integration is absolutely one of the things. If you do integration, you need standards. I think this is one of the things which is completely missing in the industry, and I speak out about that a lot. But at the other side, of course, also I think we as an industry actually need to embrace it a bit more, because we're not necessarily always forward-looking and try to be open to doing that. But I do think that the technology is there now. Everybody has access to that, not just automation and analytics, but much more than that. You talk about AI, which you really can use in combination with many of the things, like chatbots, and then automatically putting things in there. So there's a lot of opportunity there. It requires us actually to be more open-minded, to have a better understanding of it, because today, many people in the industry, including myself, I think we don't know enough of this, and then enough of the opportunities actually creates. And of course, we need to have a bit of a technical mindset to do that. At the same time, of course, we need to have the balance between high tech and high touch, because it is important. It is a very specific time, especially when we look at the mobility industry, and somebody's moving, you're vulnerable. It is a very difficult time. So actually having the right combination, actually, of course, I think is important.
Thank you, Horst. Kathryn, your firm manages probably 40 different lines of services. How has the role of technology changed in the new global reality, and what gaps do you still see between the promise and the reality?
I think it is this issue of integration. We can integrate with large global service providers and we do so on a regular basis. Where it gets tricky is when you're getting into in-country, when you're maybe potentially dealing with smaller organizations. And so to Horst's point, and integration is critical. We have to have data flowing back and forth. We also need to make sure that that data is protected. So compliance, right? Keeping on top of data protection worldwide and what that means. Kind of goes contrary in some locations to our need for data to flow back and forth easily, and for us to have access to that. Where that data sits is a challenge for us and other organizations. And then, so the reality is nobody has their entire global supply chain fully integrated from a technology perspective. We need to get there. It does start with standards, and I agree with Horst. We as an industry have been very protectionist. We've all built up our own systems, spend a lot of money doing so, and yet we're still not meeting the needs of our clients or our customers. So we're all on this journey together, and I think more collaboration is required, and there is some efforts to do that, I'm glad to say. But I also agree that the user experience is changing. High touch, high tech, again, along broad generational lines, but we move a ton of young millennials who don't want to speak to a person ever. But the user experience is never going to be what they're getting from some other amazing apps, right? So again, having everything on an app, digital, and being able to self-manage your move if you want to through a digital platform is where a lot of people want to be. And as an industry, we struggle with that for sure.
Kathryn, I appreciate your honesty there too. I think I would concur, Peggy, I want to give you the last thought on this as our people expert who's looked at different types of people organizations. How do we close the gap between the promise and reality of technology?
Well, I'll step back, Ben, a little bit with this question and maybe take it a broader outside of mobility for a quick second. It turns out I sleep with my phone and it doesn't snore, right? That's how connected we are to these devices. And, but let's think about some of the other elements within it. Our phone, now there is telehealth. There is an entire explosion going on in healthcare tech, right? All over. It turns out you can actually see a doctor over your phone. You can do weight training over your phone. You now have, street journalists using their phones for video, right? So there is a lot. And then when I think about technology, and let's pull this apart here, I think, what is it giving me? It's giving me the greatest gift that I can't get more than once, which is the element of time. Because it's all finite for all of us, right? So if technology is going to help my time or make my time more efficient, then I might be comfortable short term and sacrificing experience. And so let's think about a couple of crazy scenarios here. The grocery store. Forget the phone for a second. You now remember the day everybody would do, and you stand in these long lines. Now, turns out you can go get the bloody thing yourself and check yourself out, and nobody's complaining about how poorly you bag the groceries. Think about that, because what you bought is time, right? Amazon has a store up here. Funny story, they opened a bookstore, but they have a store up here. I know, go figure, right? 360 here or 180. So I went into the bookstore a couple weeks ago and I was all ready to pay. And he said, just put your palm over the top of this thing. So they now have, I'm not touching a single thing. I just register my palm. Now, all the people that are worried about the chips and the vaccines, that's going to be a different dynamic. But literally, you just put your palm. I walked up, handed the person my book, put my palm, and I walked out. It was like that fast. It's happening in grocery stores. If you have an Amazon Go, that's where you can break down barriers when you see about that chasm between what technology is doing. And some people were late adopters, but they probably didn't take Henry Ford's first car. They probably kept with the horses and buggy whips. That's okay, but I believe that what we're going to see is a continuation of this, and it'll just happen, and people might sacrifice experience short term to get that efficiency, and then come back and you'll see the experience improve.
Yeah, great points all. Wow, what a wonderful conversation. Kathryn, Mia, Peggy, Horst, I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for being here. I learned a lot. I hope the audience did as well. The comments were great. Audience, you were wonderful as well. The questions were fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. I want to thank also the Center for Global Business at UT Dallas for having us. I want to give a special thank you to Hubert Zadorek, Leticia Ferreira, and Imelda Freddy, who's been keeping me honest backstage. So thank you so much to all of you as well. Thank you so much for the time. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.
Great job, Ben. Thank you all.
Thanks, Ben.